Welcome to an honest conversation about leading change. I'm Serena Palmer from Serena Consulting, and I help businesses with everything from leadership development through to people strategy. And today's conversation is very much focused on something that is at the forefront of all of our minds at the moment, and that is how do we deal and lead through such volatility and change. And to help me do that, I'm delighted to introduce Robey. We've known each other for almost 18 years, which was a surprise to both of us because we're obviously not old enough. Lou joins me today as a real voice in the world of leading change and an expert on this subject. We're going to talk our way through what's on our minds, what we're seeing, and topics that really seem to be either being discussed or perhaps not being discussed. That's what we're going to do today. So Lou, great to have you here. How about you introduce yourself?
Well, thank you, Serena. It's really lovely to be here. And as you said, when we went through how we know each other and for how long, it is quite frightening how time flies by. So we won't discuss the number, but obviously we don't look at it, do we? No. So thank you. Yes. So I've been in education, change and communications pretty much most of my life, although I started in what I call the retail army back in the days when I was 16 at the youth training scheme with Marks and Spencer's. But my main focus in life has been education, leadership, communication and change. For the last 16 years, maybe even 18 actually, if I were to count it, I've probably been focusing and understanding more about change. And I'd say I've probably got nearly 2 decades in change and 4 decades in business. When you write it down like that, with AI today, it's very frightening. I probably wouldn't get a job on LinkedIn now if I wrote 4 decades.
Yeah, just don't write it down.
Don't write it down.
But it's a wealth of experience, right? And that's what really is exciting, because I think you and I have kept in touch over the years on a professional level mostly, but we know each other fairly well. And one thing we often come together on is what's happening in organizations. So both of us with our corporate experience, we've worked with big businesses, and I think we often discuss organizational change in all of its different guises. So maybe we start with a little bit about the environment that we're in, right? So I actually wrote down, it's a dynamic business environment. I don't think that is the correct word to use. I would say volatile. It's a volatile business environment at the moment. So we have things like tech advancements. We've got huge economic shifts that we're seeing globally. Massive difference now in what we expect from our workforce, both in terms of ability around tech and AI, but also how people work, hybrid working, post-COVID. We've seen all sorts of changes there. And I think leaders in particular are grappling with this scale of change in almost every direction. So perhaps if we start with some of your thoughts around what successful implementation, if we were to do it by the book, in terms of how do we engage in change, how do we get people on board, what would it look like in an ideal world? And maybe that leads us on to the reality of where we are.
Yeah. So firstly, just before I answer that, one of the things I've been doing quite a lot of at the moment is navigating a turbulent world. I didn't say in my introduction, but I have a podcast series called Voices on the Edge of Change. I've done 3 now with a lady called Marsha Schenk, who's a business anthropologist. And we've been talking together and we've been on stage together about navigating a turbulent world. I think your observation at the beginning about change, and we'll get into what is the best way to start a change program and all of that. When we get into this honest conversation, whatever I say now, I think we may end up slightly contradicting ourselves because of adaptability and remaining agile. And I sit here today, honestly, with family sitting in bomb shelters at the moment and haven't been to bed for 3 nights. So we are navigating a very turbulent world at the moment. As I said, when we get into the conversation, it'll be a lot more. You know, I think your other observation, if I may pick up on it, is that no leader ever went into business to be a leader. Very rarely have leaders gone in to be leaders. People start jobs because they're interested or excited about something. When you say to somebody, what's the ideal way that we should set about a change program, what's the best way that we should start this, you're probably thinking of it that everybody's ready to hear from you and happy to come along on the ride with you. And the fact is, it's not like that. We grew up in a society where we thought change would come and go. When I started, a lot of the language we used was, we're just going to do this one thing. We'd have a vision, a plan. We probably didn't change the plan very much because we were set in our ways. And we had something called waterfall projects. Anybody project management listening to this at the time, very strict program managers, project managers, waterfall programs. And the word agile didn't really come into it. The word test, learn and adapt didn't come into it. My recollection was I'd be given, and I talk about this having been a head of comms at the BBC, by the way, but I'd be given a comms person when I became head of change at the BBC. I'd be given this comms person, they go, right, what have we got to tell everyone? And you go, well, I don't know yet, because I need to go and figure out what it is we're going to actually be changing. Yeah, no, but we really got to go out with the comms plan. Got to get the comms plan out. We've got to start messaging people. If you don't set up your program or your project from scratch correctly, and what I mean by that is budgeting, resources, planning, learning from others, lessons learned from other people that maybe tried it, done it, not got the t-shirt yet, whatever it might be. But really, maybe even taking business analysis really deep, sometimes for up to 2 years before you start, depending on the scale of what it is you're trying to save. Because let's face it, most change programs in reality are about saving money, re-engineering a business process, saving money somehow. I don't think any one of them that I've done hasn't been about saving money or cutting heads.
Yeah.
You and I both worked in HR departments, so we get that. You have to have a vision. If you do not create your narrative and your vision and create a human-centered change program, it doesn't matter what that's for, you have to put human-centered change at the beginning of every program. If you don't, I believe your program will fail. That's my absolute USP, because you can't do things to people. And certainly when we get further in the podcast, because I've obviously prepared and read your questions about what we want to talk about today, the world that we're in now and the way that we're working, we have to bring people with us. So if you're a leader right now and you're embarking on any change, you have to be very clear of your why and the benefits, and then putting the money and the resources behind what it is you're going to do. And the last thing I'll end on, because this is probably my biggest bugbear in nearly 20 years of being a change leader, is don't bring your change person in when it's all going wrong.
I've got fireworks going off now, because I have been involved in change programs in all sorts of different guises. And that observation, that final point about bringing the change person in when it's all sort of kicked off and is going wonky and there's lots of unrest and noise in a business, seems to be something that I have seen way too many times. And I think from a personal observation, it's very difficult to trust individuals when they're brought in as almost like crisis teams, because we don't know who they are, we don't understand what their role is. And it seems to be that once the change program had kicked off and is trying to bring people on board, when that's not happening, you get this other person involved or team involved, and then there's a lack of trust in the integrity of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
What is behind that reaction? I'm just curious to know, why do you think it is, Lou, that we see that very commonly, rather than having the change person in from minute one? Why do we see that delay?
Well, quite honestly, I think that it's not been a recognised skill or profession. I think that it's seen as that sort of annoying thing that you have to have. The other thing I'd just add is we're the first to go. We should be the last people to turn out the lights. We shouldn't be going until we're absolutely clear that we've handed over to business as usual, because every project should, of course, then hand up to BAU. So I saw this wonderful guy. I wish I could remember his name and the company he came from, because I'd love to quote him on this podcast, but if he ever listens to this, he'll know who he is. But there was a gentleman that literally came and did a dance in front of me at the BBC one day. He started with, "Are you ready? Are you ready for your project? Have you got all these things yet? No? Oh, you haven't? Okay, so we're red." Right? He would walk up and down this line to try and get to green. And what he was basically showing in the space of about 10 minutes, so clever. I've done his dance many times in front of people now. But that sense of, we're always red on a project. We're actually hardly ever amber or green. And the reason for that is that we just don't necessarily understand what we have to do to make a project viable.
Yeah.
So we weren't recognised, to answer your question. We were perceived as necessary for a small part. And then we, the other thing that most change people, I'm sure, going to sit here and nod when I say this to you, is a lot of what we have to translate might appear as gobbledygook to a lot of people. I had a husband who was my test bed for me. He was an editor in the newsroom at the BBC. I would come home and say, "Tomorrow I'm going to be telling everyone this." And he went, "I have no idea what you're talking about." And thank God for him, because I think he stopped me failing quite a lot of the time. I was able to go back and think, okay, we can't say it like that. Plain English. That's not plain English. And be honest and be authentic. And speak with integrity. If there are going to be jobs lost, or if these things are going to happen, be upfront, because people aren't stupid.
No, and again, I've been witness to that in many different organisations, and that sort of trying to paint a picture which everybody can see through from minute one, that there's not going to be any significant change in terms of jobs and roles and that sort of thing. And then, of course, within a month, you've got a redundancy program. It erodes the trust that the organisation has. Before we kick into specific questions, I just wanted to share, in my world, I work with leaders on a one-to-one level as a coach, and also leadership teams, which, particularly on a senior level, the most common challenge for a senior leadership team is being a team. They come to the table as a collective, but they are in fact individual contributors and very much looking down within their own organisation. One of my reflections on change is the difficulty that there can be when it comes to individual leaders who are change resistant. And it could be because they fundamentally disagree with the change that's being proposed. However, more often than not, I pick up on a fear of risk. When we're asking people to organise their part of the business differently, or perhaps they're going to have to change direction on what they focus on, there is almost a sort of fear underneath some of that, which can manifest itself in different ways. We also tend to talk about leaders leading the change. Are we conscious that leaders of all levels need to be on board to lead a change? That's down to the first rung of leadership, whether it's supervisor or team leader. Their words matter. Is this something that resonates with you when you get the behavioural element of leadership resistance?
Oh, completely. I mean, first of all, if any change program isn't being led from the top, it will fail anyway. So if you don't have your senior leaders banging the drum, it's not going to work. But to your point, I've been thinking a lot about this. I'm developing some products that hopefully will come out in September. When I was at the BBC, how do you get 3,000 leaders engaged to understand the changes? And what really struck me, and it's a really big lesson that I'd like to share here through COVID, was we created a team call during COVID for 3,000 leaders. And I would say on every call, we would have a minimum of 1,000 leaders show up to every call with the DG or the deputy DG or in line. It was extraordinary, and it gathered pace for 2.5, 3 years. It was the most valued call in the organisation, because when you came to that call, you got real understanding of where we were as a business, where we were in the world, what we were managing, what the challenges were. Now in broadcasting, we have people all over the world trying to report not just wars and God knows what else, but also the COVID factor. And with little resources, and we're all sat at home, we're all stuck. Every country in the world had a completely different set of rules and was in and out of lockdown at totally different times. But the one thing I learned about that call, which I, thought was phenomenal was that was the first time in my 25 years at the BBC that I felt we had real engagement with our leadership team, because it was really important to come to that call. Why was it important? Because you would know something you didn't know. You'd get to grips with what was going to happen. You'd understand why it had to happen. And you actually got on board because you knew the seriousness of the crisis. When we are in crisis, we manage very well. If you had to have planned putting the whole world into lockdown for 3 years, effectively on and off, that would have taken over 20 years. We did it in 3 weeks. We did it in 3 weeks, and we adopted it, and we adapted, and we were agile. And I'm not saying it was all easy, and we had a lot of tears and frustrations. I know lots of PAs that didn't have phones or laptops or anything, right? I get it. At the end of the day, we adapted, and we didn't fall over, and the BBC didn't fall over, and you got your news and you understood everything that was going on. I think there's 2 further observations. One, we don't teach leaders to be leaders. We're not very good at it. The other thing we don't really teach leaders is about organizational development and leading change. Unless you start to do that and really understand the importance of doing that, you can't really expect leaders to understand how they need to bring people with them and how they need to change. If you don't tell people why, then you get resistance. So a classic example, and I won't name the radio station and I won't name anybody, but I will tell you that one radio station had to give up £50,000 of their budget one day and give it to another radio station. We were centralising the way we made programs. So for the sake of this conversation, because it wasn't science, I'm going to use science because it really wasn't sciences. But if you're doing all the sciences with David Attenborough and whatever it might have been, right, we were going to give up the pots from different places and put it into a central pot. We'd make a program with David Attenborough and then decide how to cut it up, whether it was red button, whether it was podcast, whether it was on radio, right? I remember a conversation with somebody saying, this is absolutely ridiculous that I have to give up my budget. That manager, who was very senior, didn't understand the overall dynamic and change in the world, that if we didn't make our program in a different way, so we wouldn't stay alive anyway, because we were looking down the face of extinction. But that wasn't being said. So if you don't tell people that, you can't then get them to understand why, you're robbing Peter to pay Paul. That's what it feels like, right?
Yeah, and it's very interesting, my budget, because just that on its own, and I've absolutely said things like that myself as a leader of a function, right? It's my resource that they're taking. And it's that sense, because we're so used to operating, particularly in large businesses, it's too big to feel part of the one collective. So you've got such a connection to your piece of the pie. And we forget that actually it's a collective resource. And sometimes we need to take something from here and move it over here. But the personal impact is you've taken my thing. It's so interesting, the psychology around that.
Yeah, there was a wonderful woman at the BBC, very young, very dynamic, a lady called Storm Fagan at the BBC, who came in to be part of head of BBC technology. I remember a conversation where she went to HR and said, right, we're going to have to move really fast with a lot of different changes that are coming down the pipe with technology. So I'm not going to recruit. I'm not going to go through any of the recruitment processes that you want me to go through. I haven't got time. What I want is a developer from X, a person from Y, somebody from C, and somebody from D. And what I want to be able to do is to have them come work with me on a 3-month or a 6-month basis, and then they can go back to their home departments. But I want to take or borrow my expertise from different parts of the organisation at the time that the project and programme needs it. Really sensible. Right? I mean, can you imagine how many policies she just broke in that conversation, right? But matrix management, wouldn't it be better to pay me to go work for Storm for 3 months to do a really great piece of work that's going to take the organisation into the future, maybe 10 times faster than start this whole recruitment thing? I might be that right person. I'm already in the organisation. I've earned my stripes. Just go help her. You drop something and I was in the right place to pick up all your fruit, I would just go and do it.
Yeah, but hold on, is it in your contract?
Yeah, and it's not in your budget, right? And
Yeah.
I'm paying for Lou Robey. I don't know
Yeah.
if I want to give up paying her salary for the next 3 months, right? While you have her. So how do you change this? And there's a lady called Marsha Shank who said on my last podcast, business is a game that was made by humans. Okay, it was completely made up by humans, right? Yet
Yeah.
nobody is prepared to change the rules.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to be the first to change the rules. And I think that when you listen to her, to some of the simplicity actually of what she's saying, it really struck me. We developed this model over 200 years ago, and we're now in a completely different world, in a completely digital environment. We've got 5 generations at work, probably soon to be 7. I'm going to quote Lindsay Simpson for anybody that wants to look at her. She's saying if you don't have an age strategy, you don't have a growth strategy.
Yeah. We're still desperately clinging on to old models that have served us well in the past and are totally unfit for purpose now. Let's look at those pitfalls. You've just done a bit of a compare and contrast to the world of work in terms of structure and the generational differences now and how things are continuously changing. Let's look at those pitfalls. If we're looking at where we sit today, what would you highlight as new pitfalls that we're seeing when it comes to business change that perhaps we didn't see so much maybe 10 years ago? What are those things that are now at the top of the list that maybe didn't exist as pitfalls?
Well, I think the fact that we thought we could do things to people that we now can't do. We have a different way of working that we didn't have before. So we don't have the water cooler moments. We don't have the opportunity to have the off the cuff conversations because everything has to be timed and decided. I don't know about you, but I don't think anyone answers their phone anymore. It drives me mad. Everybody's holding it in their hand and nobody's answering it. I don't know how many times I sound like Muttley on the end of the phone. Just pick up because that's 10 emails otherwise, right? Because I'm going to ask you a question and you're going to ask me a question. It's just like,
why can't we just have a conversation? But you're absolutely right. Everything does need to be scheduled. That's a really good observation. I would say in and out of business, we all seem to say, shall we have a chat on Saturday at 2? Whereas we used to just call.
Yeah. Have you ever received a voice message that's like 5 minutes long and you have to start writing down what it is they're saying because you have to remember what to reply to in the next return voice message? Communications has changed. Communications is different. The way we invite people to things, the human connection is really a loss at the moment. I see loneliness as a big issue right now. I think the fact that we are so isolated and lonely is a really big problem. Suicide rates are up massively. Every 40 minutes, one man will commit suicide. Women are drinking more. We've also got a much bigger awareness of neurodiversity, and I think that's a superpower if we can harness it and use it better. I think the environment in which we operate and how we operate is really our biggest challenge at the moment. Remaining connected to the people that we need to encourage to work with to make those changes.
Yeah, so it's such an important point, right? It's back to one of your points earlier on. This is any kind of change program, any change, any sort of way of operating has to start and end with the human connection. We are all just human beings. Most of the time, we are all just doing our best. Another thing that I would bring us to, which is what I would probably talk about in coaching terms, is change fatigue. This rapid pace of change and volatility. For some people, particularly those who maybe started their early leadership careers 10, 15 years ago, have been holding their breath and waiting for the moment when the change is finished so that they can just get on with the job. And that day never comes because once one thing has completed, there are 5 other change programs at play, whether they are official programs or just different operating models. This concept of change fatigue, on paper, we might view that as just being tired. I actually see burnout an awful lot.
So it's such an interesting subject for me because I've just gone on to the advisory board for a company called Trust Your Creative, who are really all about burnout. They've
Right.
just released the most incredible reports. If you go to the Trust Your Creative website, some phenomenal data about the trillions of pounds that it is costing us to manage burnout. I think well-being has never been such a subject matter that it is today. We can wrap it up under the terms of imposter syndrome as well. Burnout is massive. Em and Susan, the directors of Trust Your Creative, are at Cannes Lions today doing their first workshop. They have been going all over the world to Disney and other places in Hollywood, actually talking about the report, particularly in the creative industry, suffering burnout more and more. If you look at the creative industry, particularly in TV and film, we used to have a model of 80% employed and 20% freelance. That's practically turned on its head and is the opposite now. We've got the actors' strike, lay on the tariffs that Trump has very kindly thrown out to the world. And you start to see the lack of jobs available and the fact that most people are freelance. We're living in a world where our younger generations actually, and this is really interesting because you and I probably grew up and thought, right, we're going to go to work for 40 years, then we're going to retire, and then we're going to go see the world. And hopefully by then, by the way, paid off our mortgage, if we were lucky enough to even have a mortgage and get on the property ladder. Most of us were brought up to believe that we work for one organisation for the rest of our lives. We do our dues and we get a lovely pension because of it and we walk away. And to be fair, for most parts, for a lot of people that has my age, maybe 2 or 3 companies, but no more. Now we're in a world where people think, actually, do you know what? I was talking to my girlfriend the other day. I was horrified. My hair went like this, right? Because she said, oh, it's really great. I'm going to change the girl's name. Jane got this great job, but she's only going to take it for 6 months because she's actually got her visa coming to go and work in Canada. And she's going to spend 2 years in Canada. I'm like, sorry, because she wants to ski and she wants to do this. And you know what? Part of me was like, how great is that?
Yeah.
Another part of me was going, do you know how much it costs to employ her? Do you know what we've just gone through? And all the other people can be disappointed didn't get the job that might not be going to Canada.
Yeah.
But actually, this thought that your daughter, my daughter, are going to grow up and do a job for life, not travel in between or take 2 or 3 years off. I mean, I took a year out and somebody's going, where have you been? What did you do?
Yeah.
The fact that I learned so much, I learned about community and culture. To be fair, I took 2 years out, but I almost had to lie.
So much that you've convinced yourself it was 1 year. That's what
I
you
know.
say. Yeah, because who do you think you are? It's that kind of mindset. We were very much in that sort of like, oh my God, I'm so lucky to have God. And therefore clinging on to things when opportunity goes your way, and doing something for yourself or your well-being was surprising and frowned upon. Clearly, career is not your priority if you're going to put your well-being in front of it, for example. I shared an article on LinkedIn last week that it was from HR magazine, and it was a report to say in the UK 50% of employees have addiction issues. I think that number is much higher because society's perception of addiction, we are very reluctant to admit that there are addiction issues. If we're getting 50%, I'd say that's a conservative number. When we look at that and the tremendous strides businesses have taken with mental health and well-being, we talk about those things openly now, and we have in many organizations dedicated teams to well-being and big initiatives around support for mental health issues. We do not talk about addiction. It's, you know, I won't divert us too much, but it is absolutely associated to burnout, because what we're looking for is coping mechanisms. We are not coping. That's what it comes down to. Change fatigue is much more serious than that. It's a relentlessness, I think.
I think burnout is absolutely real. One of the other things I'd just say about well-being, though, and there are a lot of people doing some great things on well-being, but one of the biggest criticisms I hear, regardless of how well an organisation may say, we've got this fabulous internet, we've got all these resources, people aren't allowed, therefore, the time to deal with their well-being. I interviewed the founder of Alio, which is a app for food to stop food waste. I'm not explaining it very well, sorry. It's to help the environment and to stop food waste. And she has over 140,000 volunteers on an app that's been going for 10 years. She said, I don't start work every day till 10:30. And I said to her, wow, really? How do you do that? She said, well, I just don't start work till 10:30. It's just, and I've been doing that for 10 years. And I said, well, right. So what do you do? She said, well, I go into my garden, I sit in the mud, I do yoga, I meditate, I might go for a cycle ride. But it's me, it's how am I going to wake up this morning? What am I going to think about? How do I start my day? And I said, and how does that play out with everybody else? And she said, well, if somebody says to me, I want to go to yoga at lunchtime, I go, okay, go to yoga at lunchtime. And that is the culture, right? Yeah. Instead of just having all these tools and lovely things to say, aren't we great? She actually demonstrates it. Right. And that goes back to what you're talking about, change. If you don't demonstrate and behave in the way that you want your culture to be, you can't create a culture.
Yeah. It's all in the actions. My final point, because I really want to move us on, but my final point, I spoke to someone last week or the week before, and they were talking about their utter shock and disappointment in a very planned, well advertised well-being day that they hosted in their organization. They were shocked and disappointed at the very low numbers of employees who took advantage of the free massage that was being offered in a collective space. They brought loads of professionals and it was all set up, and only a handful of people took it up. They couldn't believe it, all this time, energy, money, etc. And that to me is exactly the point. What really helps individuals is having trust in their line manager, that they can say openly and honestly, I am struggling, and that they can get time off if they need it. A pre-planned massage means very little to people. That's not the thing that we need to spend time and money on with well-being. It means far more if you're really struggling one day and you're able to tell your manager, actually, my anxiety or my depression is so bad, I don't think I can get out of bed today. Can I take 24 hours as a mental health day? And having the permission to do that when you need it, and it costs very little, that's what we need.
I think it goes back to trust, doesn't it? Because at the end of the day, if I trust my team to deliver their outcomes, if they're not around tomorrow afternoon because they don't feel up to delivering that outcome, but they can still meet the outcome, does it really matter? And COVID rewrote those rules. None of us, we may have dabbled with the odd day at home. I think it was one day a week in those days. And that was nice. And that was a quiet day and you could think, or whatever it was you wanted to do, have lunch with a friend. It just rewrote all the rules. We tore up the rule book.
Yeah, but we still delivered. The proof was we could work from home, have flexibility and deliver on our targets. Yeah.
And just lastly, because I know we've got to move on, but the gentleman at ABC in Australia, because they came out of lockdown before we went into lockdown. I said to him, if you could give me a couple of wise words, what would it be? And it stuck with me ever since. He said, however you leave your business at the beginning of COVID is not how you come back. Every single person will have suffered some form of their own trauma. And that's not to be underestimated. So don't expect anyone to come back the same as they left. And I think to this day, we still don't know the studies and the evidence of what it did to people. I can say safely that my daughter's friendship groups are a disaster because of COVID. Absolute disaster now. She missed probably the 3 or 4 most important years of her life during what they call the scattering. We listened to Mel Robbins on Let Them. She calls it the scattering between 19 to 30. And it's where you've had the same people in your life for 20 years. You've lived the same way for 20 years because you've gone to school, you've been part of a pack, and then the great scattering comes because you all disperse and then they disappeared down a rabbit hole and nobody sees each other or speaks to each other. And that, for me, the evidence on that yet to be seen.
We have no idea what the longer term impacts are. of that period of time. We're seeing those generations, that the COVID education generation, which my daughter was part of, so she couldn't take her GCSEs, that generation's hitting the workforce now. So we don't know yet how that plays out. It's very easy to just brush over, oh, COVID's done. But it isn't. It's living on in so many ways. Let's continue to reflect a little on change and the difference that we see now. So you mentioned at the beginning waterfall projects. That really made me laugh, because I think the word waterfall project consumed my life for a good few years. We were obsessed with waterfall projects. Everything had to be. We don't see that now. Loads of things have changed, and there's loads of cutting edge tools, technology at our fingertips, implementing change through methodology. What do you think, moving away from those traditional models, what are your reflections and thoughts, observations on how cutting edge technology may be helping, hindering, and that how do we actually change how we change?
Yeah, reflecting on that, when you sent me the ideas that you wanted to talk about, it's quite fascinating. First of all, I think waterfall is effectively dying. There'll be some elements of it that sit within a program, but not to the extent that they did before. I think being lean and agile is absolutely key to anything we do. We used to call it learn, test, adapt.
Yeah.
I always laughed, because if you said to somebody at the BBO, it's a pilot, they didn't worry about it. When you talk about risk, nobody felt it was high risk, because we were only learning, testing and adapting a pilot. It wasn't real. In TV, pilots were pilots. You stick them out, and if they work, they work, and if they don't, so what? We spent 2 years doing pilots, which was much more than a pilot, but it gave everybody the confidence to try things that perhaps they wouldn't have been able to try.
Yeah.
So I think that's certainly something, an observation that I would make. The second observation is, I've got a wonderful friend called Jane Caddick, who I think is a phenomenal change director. She used to be at Twining. She's recently moved to a brewery company now. But she did a big ERP project and found an app that could work out by job role what people did, what skills they had, and what skills they would need when rolling out the ERP project. So what I'm saying in very basic layman terms is, Serena needs 50 hours of training and I need 2 hours of training, because Serena's job is going to be completely impacted by the ERP program. Me, not so much. I'm more of a customer. I'm just going to need to touch it now and again. So what does that also do? It tells me when Serena needs to start the training program versus when Lou needs to start the training program. It makes sure that Serena gets the just-in-time training. So if she's doing 50 hours of training, she's not going to forget everything by the time we go live. And therefore, when you look at where does technology help you, that's where I think it's really changed, because I remember years of sitting in dark rooms. So I worked on probably one of the biggest technology change programs. I won the APM award. It was certainly the biggest one at the BBC. 7 buildings into one building, the World Service, every single television channel that you can think of, including the One Show, and all our radio stations had to move into one space. Along with that, we had to change the way everybody worked, the way everybody sat, the way everybody came into the building. We had to work out a noise management plan, a travel plan, and we fundamentally changed the entire technology that every single person was going to use. And we had to do that and never go off air.
I just can't. The scale of that is, it's mind-blowing.
When I was thinking about it for you today, one of the things I realized was that if you asked me, would I have taken the job if I'd known what was really involved? The answer is I absolutely would not have taken the job.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that training program. So going back to Jane Caddick for a minute. So she's got this wonderful tool that tells you when John and Mark and Joe and Sam are going to do all this. I had to sit down and work out from 555 days of training for one person right through to maybe 2 hours of training for someone else. And that was a 10-year program. If I had had what Jane had last year, if I had had that in 2012 or even 2010 when I was doing my plan, that would have been a lot more helpful.
Yeah.
There are lots of digital tools now that will give you that insight. And when we talk about AI, this sense that AI will replace us all is not true. What it will do is give us tools and ways of working smarter and faster, providing we use it correctly with the right culture. Most people don't talk about those tools and culture in the same sentence. Probably a whole other podcast for you.
You know, I'm aware that there might be leaders listening right now, tuning in, who are right in the thick of a change program or trying to bring a team on board with managing something differently. You just mentioned AI. My question is, if there were a couple of high impact strategies to help leaders get engagement and buy-in to the change initiative, what would those things be? And just because you've just mentioned AI, I'm just going to take this moment to make a public service announcement to anyone listening. AI is amazing. I use it all the time. I work on my own. I work for myself. I have AI programmed for my business, and it's like my business partner. It's great. But here's what it is not great at. If there are any leaders out there embracing AI technology, please don't use it to write your team engagement speech or your vision statement. Please don't use AI for that, because we are such intuitive beings. We know immediately when words don't match the person. There's nothing worse than someone who wanted to do a really fancy vision statement to bring their team on board, and they've got an AI tool to do it. It looks great, but it sounds nothing like you. And from that moment, everyone's what would you suggest for leaders who are sitting here thinking, I am either just about to kick off something that feels enormous and difficult, or I'm right in the middle of it? What guidance could we give? What are the high impact strategies that you would suggest?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because that's actually what I do for a living now. I work with senior leaders to find their voice, to write their vision, to create their impact, because actually most people don't know how to do that. And interestingly, I was working with somebody recently who just said, I just don't know what to say. And I said, well, it's really simple to me. Let me ask you a couple of questions. How long have you got to do whatever it is you've got to do? 5 years. So I said, in 5 years, what would you have done? He sat there and went, blah, 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 I've done all these things. And I said, okay, so let's work backwards. How did you get there? What did you do? What did you have to do mechanically, technically? So he wrote, oh yeah, we've got to do this. We're going to have electronic systems. Da, da, da. So I said, who's going to help you to do that? Who do you need? So you see where I'm going with this. It went backwards. So what I would say is sort of my top tips about this, right? You may be the leader. You may have been asked to come up with the vision, come up with the strategy. If you're really that senior, your top team may not be feeling it like you. You may be getting resistance. Then you need to start what I would call a full creative engagement program right there. Okay, and don't try and solve it all by yourself. Perhaps you don't even have all the answers and you don't know. Bring the problem to the room and create an environment that builds trust for people to give you their view on how to get there. And I've seen that. We did 3 of those in my time at the BBC, Creative Futures. Well, Creative Futures, Shape Your Future, and Make It Happen. You can come up with lots of different names. And I know that everyone that listening to this that knows me go, yeah, but Lou, they were all people cuts. They may well have been, but if you involve those people in the challenge, the BBC may not be publicly funded in the future. People will start to show you how we may be more creative and thinking about ways that we could actually be more commercial if we had to be, how we might be able to cut some of the things that we do. And then guess what? Hey, presto, when you go out and say, we're going to stop doing X and we're going to not do so much of Y, but we're going to do more of Z, then people go, I get it. Yeah. I want to share this very quick story because I think it's so important. I had a gentleman from the newsroom, if he's listening, he'll know who he is, who came to me. He started to see the bigger picture. He started to really understand what the problem was. One day he just burst into tears. This is a big man, burst into tears in front of me. And I said, what's the matter? And he said, if only somebody had explained it like you had, I wouldn't have gone on strike. I wouldn't have been that militant person. I wouldn't have stood in the way for 4 years trying to derail the change that the BBC needed to make. And he was absolutely heartbroken. And the reason why he was so heartbroken was because he said nobody sat down and explained it to me. Nobody really explained the end game. All I saw was you were just going to cut me. You're just going to cut more people. Salami slice, salami slice. So for leaders listening, one-to-one immediate actionable high impact strategies is the why. Please don't forget the why. Why are we doing this? Why do you need to know? Why do I need you to support me? What I need your help on? Sit down, find your change ambassadors. There will be people in your organization that will want to be involved in the testing. They want to be the first. They're the ones at the Apple store before they've even opened. There are always those people. Find them, bring them close, then go find the ones that will never be at the Apple store, that will be there with placards, and bring them close. Because when you bring those people close, they become better change champions, right? Just because you're the leader, you don't actually have to know it all. You may think you do, but you don't. Some of the greatest insights have come from the person you least expect it to come from.
Yeah. That's powerful stuff, though, because, you know, the guy that sort of broke down once he'd had that complete bigger picture suddenly realized, you know, he needed the why. He was missing the why. And so you get that defensive behavior. You know, it's back to how we talked about my budget, my resources. But when we understand with clarity what, I guess, why the senior leadership team are taking a decision to change, what's at risk if we don't. And when people get that, it's much easier to come on board. I love your suggestion about working with individuals that are change resistant.
I did that for the cycling crowd. We had no bike racks and 600 cyclists moving into our building. We had no garage. We weren't allowed to use Oxford Street to dump our bikes, you can imagine, right in the heart of Oxford Street. And not being a cyclist, I didn't know that you don't just need somewhere to hang your bike. You need drying rooms, hair dryers, showers, and racks for your wet clothes every day. The long and short, for the sake of this podcast, is by bringing those really militant people right into the conversation from day one, and the unions. One big tip, if you are unionized, start talking to them at the very beginning. Be honest with them about what you know and you can do, and be honest about what you can't and where you need help. When we went live with 600 bicycle racks, to this day I don't know how we did it, showers and drying rooms and everything else that we created, but when we did do that and somebody moaned and somebody decided to kick off, the most militant person stepped in front of me and he went, guess what? This is a lot better than you'd ever imagine. Shut up. This is gold.
Your absolute ally.
Right? I turned that gentleman because he saw the problem. He wasn't me just being some sort of nutty senior leader telling him he can't have it. And lastly, because we haven't talked about this either, but I'm really big on this, which is why you and I are doing the podcast and why I'm writing a book and whilst I've got a podcast series, which is storytelling at the heart of everything. Use as much media and stories and vision. If you show people what it will look, what it will feel like, and then share the stories along the way about where it's going well, perhaps where it didn't go well and you're still learning. Stories, stories, stories.
I love that. If there are HR leaders listening to this, that includes you. Because here's a sort of observation of how HR is evolving. The same leadership ability is required in HR. We are often in HR teams supporting a leadership change. We play a critical role within an HR division to help the HR function know why we're doing it. Those same storytelling analogies apply directly to every leader in the business, regardless of whether you are an operations leader, HR support, finance, etc. It's all the same thing. We've all got to demonstrate that. I would build on that. You talked about piloting and working in a business like the BBC, where the word pilot is used for production of radio shows, TV shows. It couldn't be more obvious, right? So people get the concept of pilot. I am so surprised how reluctant people are to use the word experiment. If it was one big thing that I learned from leading a change initiative around race and ethnicity in a complicated global organization, it was when I used the word experiment. Because just like pilot, it feels and is perceived to be something less risky because we're going to give it a go.
Yeah.
And if you're a bit tired of the word pilot, which some parts of business are, the word experiment is equally applicable. It gives you almost permission to fail and fail fast, learn, move on.
So I think you, again, just for the sake of the people listening to this and language and how somebody will tell something positive out of failure. And listen, it's not a man I particularly want to name at this moment in time, because when I do name him, you'll understand why. But when Elon Musk's...
Oh, Lord. I wondered which...
Dare I say anymore?
The men that you didn't want to mention.
Yeah, so I'm not going to talk about Tesla, but when he failed going to the moon, the rocket failed, the first thing he said, which I thought was fascinating, was, that's fine, because we now know things we didn't know, and next time will be better. As a leader, he came out and said, we learned something, and when we come back, we're going to come back better, stronger, faster, safer, whatever it might be.
You've shared so many amazing insights today and wonderful stories. You really live and breathe your storytelling mantra, Lou, because each of these points, you're able to bring out an experience and an individual and then humanize that situation. When people are listening to this, there were so many things that you've talked through that are easy to connect with, and also helping us understand that everyone's experiencing this volatility, the uncertainty of where we are. Going back to basics and remembering, you talked about starting with trust, explaining the why. These reminders can lift us out of the mud, and sometimes it can feel like we're stuck in mud. We don't know which way we're supposed to be going. So going back to those core principles and speaking honestly and authentically. So thank you so much for all of those wonderful insights. You've covered lots of ground. I have no doubt that people will be interested in getting in touch with you. So if we want to get in touch with Lou Robey, how do we do that? Where do we go?
So I'm on LinkedIn, Louise Robey. I'm not Lou, but I am Louise Robey on LinkedIn. My website is being updated, but my old website is still on that handle, which is lourobey.com. But please bear in mind it is being updated because I am in this portfolio career and changing my world at the moment.
Living your own change, Lou, at the moment.
I am.
So yeah.
Yeah. I am. I'm just got a small Instagram account called Voice for Impact, as it says above me there.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time, energy and expertise, and reminding us that we're all out there just trying to do our best and getting the right help at the right time. Thanks so much. I really appreciate it. I'm always happy to help in terms of leadership, training, coaching and support on serena.consulting. It's been a huge pleasure. We could have done days, but for our listeners' benefit, we'll cut it off here. Thank you so much, Lou.
Thank you so much for having me. I've loved it.
Calm down before you stress up the groove.